Well, we have come to the final lecture of the course for 1 Corinthians. And before we get diving into that, I want to go ahead and give you an update on what's coming next semester. Now, for those watching on video, this won't apply to you, obviously. But seeing that we are in the fall 2024 semester, we're going to be approaching the spring 2025 semester, and our registration night will be Monday, January 20th, hopefully the night that Tennessee's playing for the national championship. Right, Chris? That's right. Go Big Orange. We'll see. But that'll be registration night, January 20th, around 5 or 5:30, probably 5:30. And then the first week of class will be January 27th of 2025. And at 6 p.m., I'll be teaching Ephesians Part A, which is chapters 1 through 3. It's called 1 through 3. Yeah, I'm doing Ephesians. It's BI-430A, which is the first 3 chapters. And then next fall, I will do BI-430 Part B, which is Ephesians chapters 4, 5, and 6. Dr. Johnson will be doing Eschatology Part B. For those of you who take that class after this one, you all have been taking TH503A. Well, Part B will be in the spring. But yeah, for January through May, I think it goes January the 27th through May the 12th, 13th, somewhere in there, the second Monday of May. That will be that semester. But the course will be Ephesians, Part A. The textbook will be the commentary by James Montgomery Boyce, the late, great James Montgomery Boyce. He pastored 10th Pres in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Told Sonny earlier he had about that much forehead because his head was so full of brain. He was so brilliant. And my understanding, I have a friend who was a member there and just a very gracious man. But hopefully you can join us for that. Has anyone taken the Ephesians course? Anyone taken it? Good, good. Because I was trying, I don't get to, oh, Jessica.
I may have taken it, I'm not sure, but we didn't get past like chapter 1. So
And that may, and it may, I'll have to look and see, and I'll try to do that on the break.
yeah.
I can pull up the record. Oh yeah, it'll be the same book. Yeah, same book. So you'll buy, for the classes I'm teaching next year, you'll buy one book. You'll use the first half in the spring semester and the second half in the fall semester.
Well, ours is not split, it was
It's just one, then you'll be fine.
Okay.
Because you can actually do that way too. In fact, Dr. Johnson is teaching on eschatology right now using a different book that was used in years past. So there's even a distinction on that. What, Sonny? Oh, I thought you had a question. Tina?
The name of the commentary, Robert James Montgomery.
James Montgomery Boyce, B-O-I-C-E. It's just called Ephesians. I think it's about $19 or $20 on Amazon. You might find it on christianbooks.com, find it at a bookstore. That if you get a good used copy, it's fairly easy to get. And I just get the paperback one. That's what I've got, that one, and it's fine. David?
She kind of got my question.
Okay.
The middle name is
Montgomery, M-O-N-T-G-O-M-E-R-Y, Montgomery.
And you said first day of class is January 27th.
27th. That's,
25.
yep. At 6 p.m.
o'clock.
Eastern Standard Time.
Registration date.
The week before, January 20th. Now, with all that excitement, don't forget next Monday night is your final. And whenever we break at the break, I'm going to tell you how that final is going to go. I'm not going to do that for the camera because they would be mad. Just know that I can be very gracious to those in class who show up.
Thank you.
And you're welcome. And sorry, those are the breaks. But that's just the way it goes. Let's go to the Lord in prayer, and then we're going to do chapter 16 tonight. So bow with me, please. Father, thank you for this time that we've had to walk very quickly through the letter known as 1 Corinthians. As we come to the conclusion of that, may it be more than just a class we've taken for a grade, and may it be that the Word of God is embedded in our minds and our hearts. May we understand how easy it is to be divided against one another in Christ, and how that is never good, never acceptable. There's a time to be divided with those who are holding to false doctrine, but there is never a time to be arrogant, to be divided, and to be divisive for personal gain. So guard our hearts in that, I pray. Help me to teach in a manner that is glorifying to you and edifying to your people. And as we go from this class, again, we're not just here to learn so that we have more knowledge. Paul warns about that. But we want to be doers of the word with right heart motives. And we need your help in this. Amen. I don't know how this class is going to go tonight. We will probably take a break. I'm not just going to try to fly, but it's obviously a shorter class as far as we've got the last chapter and it goes in multiple chunks. Let's review quickly from last class. And by the way I do my notes, last class was class number 14. But someone, if they were looking at my notes, they would say, hey, you skipped a week. Well, no, the midterm counts as a week and the final counts as a week. So this is class number 15. The final will be class number 16. But in chapter 15 of 1 Corinthians, Paul gave the most extensive defense of the doctrine of the resurrection from the dead, and more specifically, Jesus' resurrection. And he made it so plain, so clear. If the dead are not raised, then Christ is not raised. And what is our faith? It's useless. It's in vain. If the dead aren't raised, Christ isn't raised. Let's eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. There is no point in showing up at a building on Sundays and meeting with people who call themselves Christians. It's a sham if the dead are not raised, and more importantly, if Christ is not raised. I have said this for years now. If you want to take down the Christian faith, all you have to do is prove that Jesus Christ did not rise from the dead. Now, the antagonist would say, oh no, you must prove that he did. Well, we have evidence. And someone might say, we don't have evidence of that. You're just looking at an old book. I'm like, tell me about Julius Caesar. Well, here's what we know. Well, how do we know that wasn't just made up? Who was the first president of the United States? Well, George Washington. Well, how do we know? We don't have any audio of him. How do we know someone didn't just make it up? It's called reliable historical writing. And there is reliable historical recording of a person named Jesus of Nazareth who claimed to be the Christ of God. Others made that claim too, but he backed it up. And the most notable way is by rising from the dead. Paul satisfactorily argues that the dead are raised and that Jesus is raised. And that will move us in to chapter 16, where it's really a farewell chapter, but the first part of it is talking about a collection monetarily for Jewish believers in Jerusalem who are struggling. So let's look at verses 1 through 4 of 1 Corinthians 16. Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I directed the churches of Galatia, so you also are to do. On the first day of every week, each of you is to put something aside and store it up, as he may prosper, so that there will be no collecting when I come. And when I arrive, I will send those whom you accredit by letter to carry your gift to Jerusalem. If it seems advisable that I should go also, they will accompany me. So what do we have here? In the first two verses, Paul is talking about a monetary collection that will benefit Jewish believers living in Jerusalem. And he's going to come back to that in 2 Corinthians chapters 8 and 9. One thing that this will accomplish is, number, it will meet the need, but it will also speak volumes to Jewish believers in that their Gentile brothers and sisters in the Lord would show such love and concern for them as to sacrificially give so as to meet their real needs. The Jewish believers in Jerusalem at the time were going through especially difficult times. They were being treated harshly, largely because of their faith in Jesus as the Messiah. Understand that in Jewish life, if you were cut off from the synagogue, your life was really difficult. I don't know how many of you will remember But John chapter 7 through John chapter 10, at least the latter part of John chapter 10, is talking about the Feast of Booths, where Jesus heals a blind man. And the blind man is called to give an account of it, and there's a threat that he will be removed from the synagogue. And you say, okay, big deal. Oh no, that's a very big deal. I mean, you're shunned by everybody. Your boss is going to fire you. People aren't going to give you food. Starts to make a little more sense, right? And before you say, well, why don't they just move? Think about Hurricane Katrina. Remember that one from a few years ago? Do you remember where it hit in New Orleans, where the most damage was? The lower Ninth Ward. From my understanding, it's one of the most impoverished places in our country. Why didn't those people just leave or move? I think that would have been easier said than done. And I'm not trying to excuse laziness or whatever someone might argue. But if you're really, really poor, you might not have a way of leaving. And leave to go where? In other words, if you don't have anything, it's not like there are abundant options. So the idea, well, they should have all just left Jerusalem. Maybe some of them wanted to and couldn't. That's a possibility. But Paul doesn't go into that. What he does go into is that there are Jewish believers in Jerusalem who, because of their faith in Christ, are suffering, and we can help with that need by taking some of our financial resources and collecting them and sending them to be distributed. No, that's not socialism. Why is that not socialism? Because socialism is not a choice. That's governmental that says, you made that much, give me some. This is, you have the freedom to do this or to not. That's a big difference. And motivation should be the love that Jesus has shown to you. It's not coercion. Now, some would argue, but isn't it because of a famine? There was an earlier famine. I think that's different than here. Paul talks about that in Galatians chapter 2. He refers to how he was going to take care of the poor, and that one does seem to be more in line with a famine, but that was a few years earlier. This one seems to be more about the persecution that the Jewish believers are going through because of their faith in Christ. Now, Paul mentions other Gentile believers, and I think that's not only true, but I think it's a tactic. One of the problems at Corinth was their pride. And they had this self-bloated image of themselves. I mean, we are somebody, and Paul has been chopping them down from that. But he's reminding them, no, you're part of an overall congregation. There are churches in Galatia, and they're contributing. They're already doing this collection. And then in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, Paul will talk about how the churches of Macedonia have been taking up a collection and will have it ready. In fact, Paul says, and they were more impoverished, they gave so abundantly it hurt. Now here's a twist. By the time you get to 2 Corinthians chapters 8 and 9, the Corinthians had a lot more affluence. Now they had poverty, but there were plenty who had affluence. They had to be reminded to get the gift together. Where the other churches were giving, and Paul had to say, stop, and those were the more impoverished ones. The wealthier ones were like, oh yeah, we did say we would do that, didn't we? And that is not me saying rich is bad, poor is good. But it is a reminder that sometimes the more we have, the more we try to hold on to and protect.
That's exactly right.
Got to be careful with that. No, I'm not going to tell you, sow money into my ministry. I'm not doing that garbage. But there is a principle there. So other Gentile believers are doing this collection. This is something you should be a part of. And he does expect them to want to do this. And he talks about how they gather on the first day of each week. That's the Lord's Day. That's Sunday. And I want you to notice something here, because what he's talking about is a collection in addition to the support that they give to the church. I remember being asked this question years ago, and I'm not going to get into a debate over tithing. Is that Old Testament only? Is there a basis for it in the New Testament? I'm not getting into that argument. The New Testament tells us to give and to give cheerfully, and it speaks of giving generously. But the person said, well, how much do I have to give? And that was how they asked it. And I said, nothing. And they went, seriously? I said, oh, yeah, nothing. Well, I thought we had to give. I said, no. And I said it like this. I said, with the attitude you have, it doesn't matter how much you give. The Lord doesn't need it. And until your heart motive is, God, you have entrusted me with this, and I want to give back. I said, you don't have to give anything because he doesn't need it, and that's the wrong attitude. I just said it that bluntly too. He was pretty, abrasive with me. Preacher, how much do I have to give? Nothing. God has given us so much, and we are stewards, not owners. That he doesn't require all of it is merciful. The idea that how much do I have to give, you're already off base. Because in looking at the Old Testament, they gave first fruits and they gave these types of offerings. The idea that, well, I'll give 10%, wow, man, that was the starting point, not the ending point. And I think the average for churches is like, and I think it's fairly consistent, people typically give less than 2%. And this is not a pastor saying, hey, it's budget time, get your giving up. I think it's a reflection of we've just become stingy. And something I've learned through the years is that most of us have more than we ever really had before, and either we're not satisfied and we want more, or we're satisfied with what shouldn't satisfy. And I'm not telling you give everything away and be homeless and hungry, but generosity could be a lot more in the church. It really could be. There needs to be a wise distribution of meeting needs. And when you look at 1 Timothy chapter 5, Paul talks about how there are certain widows that qualify to receive support from the church. Now, that's a very precise list that he gives. Just being a widow doesn't mean you qualify. There are parameters that Paul puts in place. But he's telling the Corinthians, there are brothers and sisters who are really going through it right now who could use help. And other churches are more than willing to do that. I want you to do the same. So in addition to what you're giving to meet the needs of the ministers and the ministries of the church, I want you to do this as well. And because you all meet every Lord's Day, that's when you typically gather, just make it then and just start putting it back so that when the time comes and I get there, you'll have it together. It's fairly simple. I did have someone challenge me years ago saying, well, in our church, we don't believe in tithing. And again, I'm not getting into that argument. I said, what do you mean? Well, you all do offerings. See, in our church, it's as each man prospers. I'm like, you're talking about 1 Corinthians there, which he's really talking about in addition to the giving that is expected. And the guy looked at me, he's like, I haven't heard about that part. And I was like, you should actually go look at the text. Because where you're talking about is in relation to a specific need in addition to other giving. That's not the only giving. And he just looked, well, that's not what we do in our church. I said, well, maybe your church is wrong. And it was, I guess, very convenient for him because he liked holding on to his money. And again, this guy approached me. I didn't approach him. He approached me. What's that, David?
It took me a long time to get that right. To me, tithing is a part of worship. And so there's a level of even the sacrificial above 10%. It took me years to get that right, and I thank God he gave me an opportunity.
Yeah, and look, it's a reflection of God. Look at what you've given to me, and folks, let's be honest. Not that we all have to get rid of our homes and our cars and our cell phones and everything, and we have to live in cardboard boxes and eat dirt, but we have a lot of luxury. We really do. What if God says I'm cutting into that luxury? Oh, what am I going to do without this app? You'll probably live. Oh, I don't know. Gotta have it. Gotta pull it up on my TV. That's smarter than me.
We had an actuary at one of the churches I went to, and they didn't give him the names or anything, but the amounts that people gave, and he did all this math on it. It was if this was 10%, I think he said there were 4 families that were carrying this church, and it was a very large church. And he was like, if this is 10%, you all live under like $13,000.
You should be in a housing project, yeah. And
So that was a little eye-opening for people.
well, and by the way, someone had asked me about, at your church, do you all keep a record? I said, by law, we have to keep a record. I don't know who gives, don't know how much they give. I know what I and my wife give. And I just trust our financial people to take care of that. And in recent months, they've been wearing a lot more gold. No, they haven't. We have some very reliable people, and they are able to be trusted with that information. But yeah, it's overall, it seems like the more prosperous we are, the less generous we are.
That was before COVID, so.
Yeah. So,
I know the Pharisees were legalistic about.
right, they would do it
their
for
giving,
show.
But just the fact that they tithed on even the produce and the herbs of their garden, I think created like a mindfulness of how God was providing in each and every aspect of their life.
Yeah.
Of course, they wanted to be seen and stuff, but it's interesting how every aspect of their life.
Their wrong motive didn't undo the fact that, yeah, that's the right way to, that is the right thing to do,
Right.
but why are you doing it? You're not impressing him. You're only doing what's expected, but then you're showing it off, right? Yeah. It's, so we don't go, well, the Pharisees did that, so we'll do the opposite. No. You know, someone might do the right thing with a wretched motive and a rotten motive, but the right thing needs to be done, so.
Church Tract says that the average person, Protestant churchgoer, gives $17 a week. And that 47%.
I give 18, no, I'm kidding.
And that 47% give at all. The rest just are pretending.
I want to say something on this, and we have a little time tonight. This is not to excuse it, because ignorance is not an excuse. I personally think that the more exegetical the preacher and the pastor is, the better the church will be. Now, that doesn't just mean information equals, faithfulness. But I would rather have good information than not. Well, our budget's low, so I'm going to preach on tithing. How about you preach through the text? And when that comes up, preach on it. There's not an agenda there other than it's in the text. Yesterday at our church, I'm teaching through 1 Thessalonians, and in chapter 2, Paul is talking about how he and Silas and Timothy went to Thessalonica, and the way they got there was very difficult. I mean, they were beaten and imprisoned in Philippi. They preach in Thessalonica. They get ran out of the town. So they weren't like the known, famous, wealthy speakers who would come in and speak just to get money. And then he attaches something there at verse 6. He says, those apostles of Christ, we could have exercised an authority. Paul could have rightly said, hey, it would be good for you to support us. But he said, we chose not to do that. Well, some people, then churches shouldn't pay pastors. No. There's a reason why Paul didn't do it. And he's similar to Corinth. I didn't do that because I didn't want to be accused of being in this for money. But then Paul gives instructions on how the church should take care of those who minister to them. It's a balance. And see, if you hear a preacher who finds a passage and goes, well, here's what that means. Well, wait a second. What about over here? I just think the more balanced you are in having a pastor who's going to walk you through all of Scripture, I think the church will be better equipped. I really do. And I think there's going to be an understanding. Now, that's a long way for me to get to this. I think that there is a generation of people who either grew up in the church and are very ignorant, or didn't grow up in the church and they don't have a clue. And then they hear about this and they're like, whoa, what's this? What's this giving about? Well, here's what it's about. And I'll just give you a real life picture. When I was growing up, my mother, when we would have a church meal, she would make enough food for about 75 people. And other ladies in the church would make enough food for about 75 people. So you had all this food. Now you go to a church, church meal, and a family of 7 goes, hey, we brought a dish. And you're like, well, I hope Jesus shows up. Because that family of 7 brought us a dish just barely bigger. That family of 5 didn't bring a dish. I don't know. It's just a different mindset. It's almost like we show up and there's magically food there. No, you have to bring it. you have to bring it. Some of it is ignorance, and again, it doesn't excuse it. But so how do you combat it? How did Paul combat error? How did Paul combat false doctrine? With sound doctrine, with biblical teaching and preaching. I don't, as a pastor, I talk about finances when it's in the text. I talk about church discipline when it's in the text. I talk about whatever when it's in the text. And Paul deals with a whole lot, and the Gospels deal with a whole lot of things. You deal with that stuff. So.
I heard a story one time.
Me too. Oh, sorry, there was more. Go ahead.
It totally changed my perspective on this. This is how the Lord grabbed my heart. There was a contractor that was verified as being true. His brother was a preacher, and this guy on the contractor company, he gave away concrete, he gave away supplies, and when he got older, he went to the nursing home. Long story short, some of his so-called friends said, you idiot, if you hadn't given away all your money, you'd have had something. Mm-hmm. And he looked right in the face and said, that's how we do now.
Yeah.
I was like, wow.
Yeah.
And that totally changed my perspective. He's storing treasures in heaven, and we're so focused on things on this earth. When we got a perspective.
Yeah, Jesus gave the parable of the man who said, I will build bigger barns and enjoy my life of pleasure. And he said, you fool, this very night your soul is called into account. I don't care how big your barns are. So it's a mindset, it's a heart attitude. It really is. And again, this doesn't mean that every Corinthian believer had it wrong, but when Paul has to come back to it in the second letter and remind them, I think that's an indication where he even says, I have to tell the Macedonian churches to stop. I'm having to remind you to do it. Oh, but my friends who want to run to 1 Corinthians and emulate them, I'm like, whew, this letter is mostly corrective. Verses 3 and 4, Paul mentions his planned visit to Corinth and his expectation that the Corinthians will select from amongst themselves men who will be trustworthy to take this monetary gift from Corinth all the way to Jerusalem. That's a substantial journey. And I trust, and number one, I think this is actually a verse that indicates membership. I really do. I think it's very similar to Acts 6, where when the Hellenistic widow issue came up, the apostle said, choose from amongst who? Yourselves. There's a recognized body. But there are going to be men in your congregation that ought to be trustworthy. Select those men to be entrusted to take the gift from Corinth to Jerusalem. And then he even says, and if you want me to go, if you think that's advisable, I'll go too. But I'll leave that up to you. I'm not lording it over you. Even though I've been very corrective in this letter, I do love you, and it's not like you're blowing it in every area. I mean, if all you do as a parent is scold your child, then you will exasperate them, which is forbidden in Ephesians 5. Now, correction is going to be there, but you've also got to come alongside them and say, hey, I do love you, and you do some things right. So I think this is an indication of there are trustworthy people there. You know who they are. Get a coalition and send them, and if you want me to go, I'll go too. If not, I won't. But what I want over everything else is accountability. Whatever the church, starting each Lord's Day, is collecting and setting aside, I want that amount to get to Jerusalem. That's what I want. And that's how he finishes those first 4 verses. It's a very quick little section, but it's substantial. Now he's moving to his conclusion. Look at verses 5 through 9, and this is what Paul is wanting to do, his itinerary of sorts. Verse 1, I will visit you after passing through Macedonia, for I intend to pass through Macedonia. And perhaps I will stay with you or even spend the winter, so that you may help me on my journey wherever I go. For I do not want to see you now just in passing. I hope to spend some time with you if the Lord permits. But I will stay in Ephesus until Pentecost. For a wide door for effective work is opened to me, and there are many adversaries. So in verses 5 through 7, we hear about Paul's original plan to travel to Corinth after going to Macedonia. But according to 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 15 and 16, those plans changed, and Paul said, actually, I want to come to you, then go to Macedonia, then come back to you. Because I just want to be a world traveler. No, something took place, and Paul said, this is what I'm wanting to be able to do. By the way, Macedonia is the region where Philippi and Thessalonica are located. So it's not all that far away. This would be manageable. But Paul did anticipate staying in Corinth through the winter and hoped that the congregation would help him, and I think financially, as he ministered. Paul had every right to command this from them because he had started the church, he had fostered the church. They're still seeking his counsel, but he had kept from doing that, in part because he knew that his opponents were saying he's only in this for money. But he loved the saints at Corinth. And I hope y'all caught that in these words. He did love them. I want to spend time with you. I want to spend substantial time with you. But that's contingent upon the Lord's direction. But no, I've been very corrective with you in this letter. You all have endured on this Lord's Day the hearing of this letter read, and it's coming to the conclusion. And lest you think I'm just angry and I don't like you anymore, no, I love you. And I want to spend time with you. I can't wait to see you. But that doesn't mean that there aren't things to deal with. I just love how Paul affirms his care for them. Because sometimes correction can feel as if it's coming from an enemy. And it can feel as if it's the death sentence, when all it is someone who loves you dearly, who sees you going down a path that is dangerous, and they're desperately trying to get in the way of you in that danger. But it doesn't feel that way. It feels mean and just you're overbearing and judgmental. And no, I'm trying to stand between you and disaster. That's what he's doing here. In verses 8 and 9, at the time of writing this letter, he was in the city of Ephesus. Now, Ephesus is known as the gateway to Asia. It's there on the western shore of Asia. And when you look at Revelation, specifically chapters 2 and 3, the 7 churches, now I'll be giving away a little glimpse of my eschatology here, in that I do not think that those are 7 ages. I know others will disagree with me, and I love you even though you're wrong. And I say that in jest. Those are 7 real churches. And why are they in the order that they're in? Well, because Laodicea is the last. That's because it's the last on the road. Why is Ephesus first? Because it's first on the road. It literally is a road, and each of the churches are in order as they are on that journey. I think that's all it is. I don't think, well, this is this age. I don't buy into that. I don't. And I love you even if you do. And if I'm wrong in heaven, we won't fight about it. But Paul planned on staying at Ephesus at least until Pentecost. Let's think about the Old Testament, and let's think about these feasts. What is Pentecost? Who knows?
50 days after Passover.
Passover. Is that what you were going to say, Chris? Because he's right. That's right. You have Passover. 50 days later, you have Pentecost. What is Pentecost in the Old Testament? Do you know? It's called the Feast of Weeks. Yes, Pentecost was something observed in the Old Testament. Passover in the Old Testament, 50 days later, the Feast of Weeks. That's what Pentecost is. So when you read in the Old Testament about Feast of Weeks, that's Pentecost. Just keep that in your thinking. Paul says, I'm going to stay in Ephesus until then. And part of the reason why I'm not going to leave just yet is because God is opening a great door for gospel ministry here in Asia. And there's a whole lot of opposition, but there's a wide open door for ministry. Now, I just want y'all to think on that for a moment. And I'll admit I'm a little biased here because yesterday, as I'm teaching through 1 Thessalonians at our church, the sermon title from chapter 2, verses 1 through 6 is Marks of Faithful Ministers. And one of the marks of faithful ministers is that they are willing to endure God-ordained difficulty for gospel ministry. Too often people think, well, if God's in it, every door's going to open. It's just going to be easy. It'll be a breeze. Everything's going to fall into place. You need to read Paul. Rather, you need to read Luke about Paul. Because as I was saying earlier, when Paul was with Silas and Timothy on that second missionary journey, wanting to go further into Asia with the gospel, God, it says the Spirit of Jesus prohibited them. Why? That was a good desire. It's a great desire. I just want you to go a different direction. So they do. And they go toward Macedonia. Get to Philippi. Paul cast a demon out of a girl. They get the crud beat out of them. Thrown into prison. He and Silas thrown into prison in the midnight hour, bruised in stocks and chains, praising God at the midnight hour in song. So that when God sends an earthquake and the prison doors open, the prisoners don't run out, they run in. Well, Paul, don't you think if this was of God, it would have been easier? No. Well, at least when we get to Thessalonica, it'll be easier. No. Same treatment. Well, we're going to Berea. At least they'll treat us well there. No. Everywhere they went, there was opposition. And here's how Paul saw that. God has opened a door for the gospel. Our thinking is usually like this. Well, we were going with the gospel, but people didn't want to hear it. And they roadblocked us, so we knew God wasn't in it. Now, it's true that there can come a point where God says, shake the dust from your sandals, but I think we do that a little quickly sometimes. And we've bought into this idea that if God is in it, everything is smooth sailing. Some of the most clear evidence that God's in it is that the waters are the choppiest and the storms are the strongest. Paul says there's a wide open door for the gospel in the midst of much opposition. He says there are many adversaries. That's right thinking biblically. I love that. I mean, I'm not looking forward to persecution or anything like that, but I like to know that, Lord, you are in this. Yeah. Well, it's not easy. No, sometimes it's easier than other times, but a lot of times it's not easy at all. And that may be one of the clearest indications God is in this. I remember hearing someone say one time about having to wait on the Lord, and they said, well, if God were going to do this, he would have done it by now. That's what they were telling me. And of course, I was a little less patient. I'm so much more patient now. Just ask my wife. She would accuse me of lying right there. But what I said was right. My attitude probably was wrong. But I said, I wonder if Joseph ever thought that after having the dream about, his brothers and his parents bowing down to him. If he ever thought if God were in this, he would have done it by now, because it took 22 years. 22 years of a lot of cruddy treatment. We just never know. Just because something is tough doesn't mean that God isn't in it. In fact, it might be that he is in it. Now, it could be that you're just stubborn and God is disciplining you. But don't just assume that if God's in it, we'll have his blessings and that means everything's easy. It's just not how it works, folks. Let's look at 10 through 12. When Timothy comes, see that you put him at ease among you, for he is doing the work of the Lord as I am. So let no one despise him. Help him on his way in peace, that he may return to me, for I am expecting him with the brothers. Now concerning our brother Apollos, I strongly urged him to visit you with the other brothers, but it was not at all his will to come now. He will come when he has opportunity. That one might sting a little. I'll explain why. In verses 10 and 11, Paul had sent Timothy to Corinth. Timothy would have arrived shortly after this letter had arrived. We know from chapter 4, verse 17, that Paul said Timothy has been sent. So he would have shown up a little. I would have thought that he would have given it to Timothy, but that's not how it played out. The letter went and Timothy got there a little bit after. But it does seem plausible that some in the Corinthian congregation had rebelled against Paul. Think about what issue he just dealt with in chapter 15. Some of you are saying that there's no resurrection of the dead. I didn't teach that. You're divided. I didn't teach that. You're abusing the Lord's Supper. I didn't teach you that. And you can just imagine as this letter is being read, not everyone would have been like, oh, I'm so glad this letter came. Folks, that's just not how the church is. think sometimes we have this romanticized view that every church that Paul planted, everything just went smoothly. Nobody got out of line. Oh, well, read the letters. I'm handing this one over to Satan. Golly bum. You know why that happened? Because guess who the church consists of? Sinners. Ruined sinners who have been redeemed, but still sinners. With preferences, with opinions, with stubbornness, with rebellious hearts. I don't think every person in the audience at Corinth that day listening to the letter read would have liked it. I think Paul assumes that and anticipates that. And he also knows that Timothy is connected to me. You know Timothy, you love Timothy, but those of you who are not really with me right now are not going to be with Timothy either. I've met people like that. I remember one time meeting a man who I was convinced was the offspring of either Haman or Judas Iscariot. If you don't know who Haman is, he's a bad guy in the Old Testament. But my relationship to a particular person whom he despised, that's what he knew of me. He didn't know me, but he knew that I was a friend of this person that he despised. Guess how he treated me? Not with warmth. Didn't know me from Adam, but didn't like me. All because of my association. By the way, this particular man, you hear about that deacon in the church that's lost. I think that man was lost. I really do. I think he was lost. Not just because of the interaction, but everything I saw in that man, there was no joy. There was no fruit of the Spirit that was evident. People feared him in that church. I mean, they feared him. They're like, don't cross him. Oh, you'll pay the price if you do. I'm like, goodness. Your association with someone who is being faithful to the Lord, but dealing with people who are being unfaithful, just the association with a brother who's in good standing with the Lord might get you the cold shoulder. I think that's part of what might be happening here. So receive Timothy, treat him well. He's doing the same work I'm doing. And Paul expects that they will take good care of him. They will send Timothy back to him after they have supported him in the work. Again, I think there might be a financial implication there. He's going to come to minister to you. Help him out. It's only right. We were the ones who started the church there. And this is not Paul lording that over them, but it's just a reality. Verse 12, the second person that Paul mentions in this section is Apollos. Do we remember who he is? He's one of the four mentioned in chapter 1 where I'm of Paul, I'm of Cephas, I'm of Apollos. And Apollos was a very eloquent man. We know that from Acts 18. But he was a teachable man. We also know that from Acts 18. But Apollos was being revered, not that it was his fault, by some who were idolizing him. He had ministered at Corinth. He was loved there, especially by a certain group. And Paul says, I urged him to come to you, but he didn't think he should right now. That's a little bit biting in my opinion. Go ahead, Sonny.
I've read in one of the commentaries, and they said this could be translated as it was not God's will for him to come back.
It's possible. It is possible, because he does say, I will go at a later time. But I do think there's a little bit of room of, well, Timothy came. Apollos didn't come, no, not right now, but he's going to come to you, but it'll be a little bit later. Well, just think of it this way. Well, why would somebody else be the priority? And part of what Paul is doing in this letter is like, hey, I want you to help out with this monetary gift like the Galatian churches are doing. And then later, like the Macedonian. You mean there are other churches? You mean there are other believers? We're not the stars of the show? I think that's possible. I really do. And especially for that group who puts Apollos up on this pedestal, wait, he's deciding not to come? It is amazing how immature people can act in church. I remember one time, and I've changed this, I don't do social media much, but I do try now every day to do birthdays. But when I was first on there, I didn't do birthdays. I mean, I didn't get on every day. So when I would see them, I would say, hey, happy birthday, whatever. And I come to church one Sunday, and there's a lady, she's there, and she's usually very, hey! She's like, so how you doing? I'm fine.
Guess where this is going.
I'm fine. I'm like, sure, something on your mind? No, I'm all right. And I just, is there something wrong? Have I done something to you? Well, yes. I was like, oh boy. What have I done? I really wanted to know. I said, well, the other day you wished someone from this church a happy birthday on Facebook. My birthday was this weekend and you didn't wish me a happy birthday. And I went, whew. And I explained, I said, hey, I'm not on there every day. And I'm certainly sorry that I missed yours. I didn't mean anything about it. It's okay. I'm like, it's obviously not okay. But I'm like, this is what I'm thinking. I'm talking to a 40-year-old middle schooler. Give me the benefit of the doubt. So this was a younger version of me and less wise and beautiful. On January 1st, that following year, I put on my post, I wish you a happy birthday. You know who you are. You being every one of my friends. I know that today is not your birthday, but you know when it is. Well, that didn't go well either. And that was my fault. That was my fault. And then finally I said, you know what, I'll just do it every day.
That's a very man thing.
It is. But I was just like, but I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, that bothered your weekend. My goodness. I mean, if I was egging your house and letting the air out of your tires and hitting your kid, okay. I didn't get on Facebook for a weekend, so I didn't know that was your birthday. Sorry. Happy birthday. You know, we can get our feelings hurt very quickly. Whole lot of immaturity. And that's what Paul is dealing with so often, especially at the Church of Corinth. I tell you what, let's take a break. Let's take a break. Sonny, if you'll hit that camera, and then we'll finish up with a short section